It's exactly what you said it was. A premature ventricular contraction is a ventricular contraction that's premature. I mean, look at this heartbeat right here. Is that a sinus contraction? No, because that's not a P wave. That's the T wave of the previous beat. That's a sinus contraction. Is it junctional? No, because a junctional would have a regular narrow QRS, and here we got this wide QRS. So that makes it a ventricular contraction. But notice in the timing, it's a little early. What's premature standing for? So it's a ventricular contraction that's early. So what a PVC really is a message from the heart saying, I'm not happy. I don't like what you're doing here. I'm irritated. Now, the most common cause is simple hypoxemia, but another cause can be irritation of the heart. We mentioned that, putting in a Swan-Ganz catheter, the heart's going, what the heck is this? I'm not used to having this in me. And you can stimulate some of those other focuses and it'll just fire. So the solution is make sure they're oxygenating. And if that's not working, then do something that will decrease the heart's irritability. Now, the preferred drug there would be amiodarone. But sometimes on the exam, they like to make it to where you can't administer it because vascular access is unobtainable. Well, lidocaine. It's, again, not the preferred, but it still works. It worked for decades. That was our answer a long time ago. And it goes down the tube. And so that might be the answer. So you ought to keep that in your toolbox. We'll mention that again. And you'll see it listed there. In terms of letter F on page 45. Notice how it mentions oxygen first, lidocaine. I would add in amiodarone, which is generally the preferred. You can figure out the spelling on that one. It's going to take me too long to tell you what the spelling. Plus, we'll mention it probably a little later on when we get into stuff, but you'll be able to Google that. Amio, A-M-I-O. I don't know. It's going to end in an O-N-E. Durone, D-O-R-O-N-E, something like that. I don't know. Google it so you can figure it out. It's no big deal. All right, so it is a ventricular contraction that's premature. Comes a little early. Now, what it really is a sign from the heart saying it's irritated and you want to deal with it. Starting with oxygen, because that's a common reason, or decreasing the irritability of the heart. Now, here's one you don't have, and maybe we'll put it in a future edition, because I got a tutor call that said, hey, they had these PVCs, but they didn't have that as an answer. Did it happen early or late? What do you mean? Well, did it happen early in the sequence like this one? Or was there a space where nothing was occurring and then it happened? Oh, yeah, it was a flat spot and then it happened. Well, that's not early. It's late. You can't call it premature if it's not early. Now, that is a ventricular contraction. So they simply have a different name for it. It's called a ventricular escape beat. And you could put that in your notes there under or around letter F. You could even just write if late equals ventricular escape beat. So it looks like a PVC, but it's not P. It's not premature. It is a ventricular contraction. And basically, it's the same thing for the same reason. The heart's a little irritated, kind of send you a message. It's a ventricular beat for some reason, either irritated and got stimulated. But instead of happening early in the sequence, it's, I'm not waiting any longer, bam, and it fires. So it's a late beat, so they're going to have to call it something slightly different. Ventricular, yes. Escape beat. Okay. So it looks like a PVC that's late. Okay. Now, what if you ignore these? Well, then you'll get more. But notice these two look the same. These two look different. Some people wouldn't see two here. They get so used to a PVC kind of looking a certain way that they look at this slide and go, well, that's the PVC, and well, so's that. Yeah, but it doesn't look the same. That's because this was initiated by a different focus. More than one focus is trying to send you messages that they're irritated. Hey, you're not leading that first guy. Maybe you'll listen to me. We don't like what you're doing. We want you to stop it and give us our oxygen, dadgummit. The reason they look different is because this one was initiated by a different focus. More than one. Because I know you've heard the phrase multi. More than one focus is sending you information. More than one focus sending PVCs. So more than one. That's why it looks different, because it's being initiated by a focus that's located somewhere else. And so the waveform is going to look a little different. PVCs don't need to look a certain way. They need to fit certain criteria. Wide complex, QRS, without a P wave. Generally happens early in the cycle, because if it happens late, remember, it's a ventricular escape beat under those conditions. Now, a lot of times when people will see, or if I will describe, let's say we saw 3 PVCs in a row, they may use this term trigeminy because the two are often confused. The geminies have to do with every other beat's a PVC. That's bigeminy, every 2. Or it's a normal beat followed by a normal beat, then followed by a PVC. Every third, that would be trigeminy. So it's how often are you getting a PVC? Every other beat bigeminy, every third, trigeminy. But PVC, 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 that's VTAC. 3 in a row is all it takes. So the geminies are how often, and you can go nuts with it. Quadrigeminy, pentageminy, octogeminy. Oh, stop it! Every 8th one, that's octogeminy. Okay, so decigeminy every 10th. That gets a little crazy after a while. But PVC, PVC, PVC. That's all it would take. 3 in a row, and you got to run a VTAC. Well, that's what we're looking at here: ventricular tachycardia. The question is, what's your immediate action? Everybody says, I'm going to grab the paddles. I'm going to stick one of them in the right upper corner, and the other one goes down and to the left. Yeah, that's probably where you put the paddles. But you better not be pushing the button yet, because what kind of VTAC have you been taught needs to be shocked? And the answer is pulseless. So if the question is, what are you going to do first? The answer is not shock them. The answer might be check their pulse, for goodness sake. Getting back to the second rule. Read all 4 every time. Because if I was writing the question, I would have letter A, defibrillate, at 300 watt seconds or whatever. And then maybe letter D says check their pulse. Yeah, you might want to do that. Okay? You don't want to get crazy. Now, basically, VTAC doesn't have to look a certain way either. Notice, what do we got? Wide complex. What do we got? Wide complex. So it just has to fit that criteria. VFib is going to be so fast, you're not be able to figure out what the count is. So VFib, you defib. And just like we've mentioned before, in the upper right-hand apex of the heart is where the one paddle would go. The other one would go down and to the left. And then you charge it up, and if there's no pulse, you go ahead and light them up. Now, no beat at all. Remember, A means without. So asystole, no beat. Well, okay, so you see a heart monitor, and this is what you're seeing. So, oh my God, the asystole, I need to grab the crash cart and run in there, and you put a paddle here and put a paddle there, and just you're about ready to push the button. They open their eyes going, what the heck are you doing? You rushed it. And right about now, you see one of those little electrodes is just dangling in midair. That's what happened. This thing simply fell out. That's why the treatment there on page 46 says you better confirm this in more than one lead, and you better make sure your patient is not conscious. Because it could have just been they got disconnected. That's why the alarms are sounding, and that's why it looks like it's asystole, and it's not. Because sometimes when it truly is asystole, shocking them can get that heart going again, but it might just be disconnection. That's why you always talk to your patient, make sure they need what it is you're about to give them. You shock them at the wrong time, you can put them in a life-threatening arrhythmia. You certainly don't want to do that. Then starting on page 47, if you look at that tracing, or you can look on the screen, what should stick out to you is the fact that that final bump is kind of upside down. And there's several ways to say that. You could say it's a depressed T wave, or it's inverted, or it's upside down, either way. If that's all you tell me, there's 2 possibilities. And so often, to clarify, you either only give one of those as in the 4 choices, or you tell me a little story that will clarify which one of those 2 possibilities it is. If the story includes a blood gas that's metabolic alkalosis, low potassium would be what I would suspect. Potassium and the T wave tend to do the same thing. So potassium gets low, the T wave tends to get a little low as well. But if the patient's story is they're, feeling like they have indigestion, a little tightness underneath the sternum, and they're just a little bit uncomfortable, and that's starting to sound like ischemia. Now, what that is, not enough blood flow to the heart itself. So inadequate coronary blood flow. It's like the first part of what could lead into a heart attack. The heart is not feeding enough blood to itself. So you've got some coronary artery issues.